Congressman, thank you so much for being here and breaking this down for us. Always good to see you. So tell people, first off, I'm amazed that this had such bipartisan support that it passed, so that's a huge win. Thank you for looking out for the American people. But tell us about this and why American people need to be so incredibly concerned about this, because I don't think that this has been on a lot of folks' radar.
Yeah, thanks, Dana. And this is one of those bills that we worked on for a long time, a few years in the making. Anna Eshoo, a Democrat from California, has been working on this with me for a number of years. And we've been concerned about, as data flows across our networks, people use the internet in so many ways. And, you know, with so many smart devices, you're not even realizing how much of your data is moving across networks, some of which are owned by foreign owned entities, including Chinese companies. And so we started working with the FCC and a few years ago passed a law to make the FCC identify companies that are national security threats. And they did that. But one of the flaws that we saw in that law was that even though a company would be identified as a national security threat, they could still sell and be licensed in the United States. And so that's when I went to work to put this bill forward. And Anna Eshoo, like I said, was the co-sponsor of this bill. And it says if a company ends up on the FCC's list as a company that is a national security threat to America, then they cannot be licensed by the FCC. And so there are now 5 companies that are listed as national security threats, all Chinese owned. And so this bill says they can no longer be licensed by the FCC, and it protects American data for those Americans that are sending data across networks. They would no longer be worried that these companies will be getting control of their data.
Yeah, and that's incredibly important because this, I mean, we had this fight with Huawei with former President Trump, and it seemed for a long time that he and you and others in the administration were the only people that were trying to voice concern about what China was doing with these companies. And what gets me, Congressman, is that we even have to pass an act to make sure that we are not allowing businesses affiliated with a communist regime that would love to see American destruction, that we're not allowing them to work here in the United States and be licensed to do so. I mean, it seems like an obvious thing to have happen. And I'm actually, like I said, I'm surprised that enough people in Congress recognized that it was the threat that it was and voted accordingly. I mean, I guess that I'm not sure what you could attribute that to, but I was actually surprised, very much surprised at that. Now, this obviously, I mean, this is passed and this is, but I feel like I know that the administration was still considering maybe perhaps licensing certain things through Huawei, and that there's still threats out there from different aspects of Chinese communication, correct?
Yeah, and this would look, Huawei is one of the 5 companies, as well as ZTE. Those are probably the 2 most prominent companies that still have a lot of equipment out there where Americans' data runs across those networks. They would no longer be able to be licensed by the FCC. Again, because they're listed as national security threats. And this took a lot of work, and I guess it probably doesn't get the attention it should because it was Republicans and Democrats working together. There are still some things where we're able to put these coalitions together, and this took a lot of work of all of us coming together. And like I said, credit to Anna Eshoo, who really took this seriously as well. She represents part of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
I've got a computer science degree. We've worked on technology issues together in the past, and we know how much of a threat this is because, look, people use so many different forms of technology. And, you know, maybe your smartphone is the main device you use, but there's a lot of others. TVs are now smart devices, too. And the backbones of a lot of these networks are companies you've never heard of, and yet your data is running across those networks. And this just says, look, the FCC regulates all this. If the FCC identifies any company as a national security threat, they can now, under this bill, no longer get licensing from the federal government. So it protects the data of Americans, whether they realize their data is running across those networks or not.
And that's the thing, Congressman, to you and I, this seems like a simple issue, and we obviously want to make sure that our data is protected. For the average American that's out there who, you know, they're busy working 9 to 5 to pay whatever Joe Biden's going to tax them with here coming up, heaven forbid if it passes. They're trying to keep a roof over their heads. How do you break it down and make that very personalized towards them? They might say, well, I don't care if somebody from CCP gets my information. Well, maybe they will if it's like, you know, bank information from a transaction that's made or something else.
Right. Credit card information, Social Security information, breaches of your personal data. You know, you sure would care about it if your credit card was stolen and you called and said, cancel the card. Well, what if you didn't even know that credit card was stolen and charges might pop up? And again, the Chinese Communist Party has access. They can go to these companies and say, you've got to give us the data if you're a Chinese-owned company. And you don't even know it. You might have an Apple phone and you're running it across Verizon or AT&T or some other network. You don't realize that at some point it may be going through a Huawei or a ZTE device, and you don't even realize it. Well, now, if they're listed as a national security threat, it cannot run across those networks here in America because they can't get licensed by the FCC once this bill is signed into law. But it was passed overwhelmingly in the House, passed unanimously last week in the Senate. Again, didn't get a lot of attention because it was one of those areas where we really did work together on something that I think is a very important national security issue. And it's now going to be going to the president's desk. Hopefully it gets signed quickly so that we can get that extra layer of protection for Americans and their data.
Yeah, one last quick question, not so much related to the tech issue, but it is related to China, and also has to do with the president being at the COP26, I think, the climate thing for the rich snobs that all took their 400 some odd jets up there, up in Glasgow. Congressman, I have to ask you, it was interesting to hear the president say that he wished that China would have contributed a little bit more as it related to the environment and reduction of emissions. And he was talking about the Paris Accords and apologizing to, I guess, all the national leaders assembled for the United States had previously withdrawn from the Paris Accords under former President Trump. I was just curious as to your reaction to this. I mean, at least he did mention China, but to apologize to everyone for the United States removing itself from something that should be a treaty and was not treated as such. I mean, I don't think that he should be apologizing for the United States acting within its own sovereign ability.
Yeah, and instead of the president going to other countries apologizing for America, he should recognize the fact that the United States of America was one of the very few countries that actually reduced our carbon emissions by getting out of the Paris Accord. There's not a single country in Europe that was in compliance with the Paris Accord because it, first of all, exempts China. Russia said they're not participating either. China and Russia are laughing at this conference. And by the way, I'd love to see the carbon footprint of all those private jets flying over to Scotland to tell other people not to use fossil fuels. A lot of irony in that. But again, we were the country that was leading the way on reducing carbon emissions by not being in the Paris Accord. He failed to mention that when he was too busy apologizing for America. It was American technology that reduced our emissions. Now we're literally putting a stranglehold on America's economy. And by the way, it's going to increase global emissions because by exempting China, exempting Russia, you're actually going to send more jobs to countries that emit higher levels of carbon. We should be making more things in America. And oh, by the way, this also increases the cost for families. Inflation in America is already out of control. This makes inflation even worse. And household electricity costs are higher. You're paying more at the pump because of these kind of policies. They're killing pipelines like Keystone in America, but greenlighting the Russian pipeline. President Biden says don't drill in America, but then he begs OPEC to drill more and produce more, which, by the way, they said they're not going to do, but they emit more carbon.
Right.
If Saudi is drilling for oil, they're emitting a lot more carbon in America because we have higher standards. Stop bashing America.
Yeah.
Stop beating up on America. Make more things in America. We were leading the way in reducing emissions through American technology. Don't hurt our economy and then give a gift to Russia and China.
Yeah, exactly. He should have just said everyone needs to match what we've been doing and then walk out. That's it. That's all he needed to say. Congressman Steve Scalise, appreciate what you do.
Thank you. And do it on Zoom.
It would have been.
All those jets over there. They tell kids not to go to the classroom, but then they want to fly their private jets to a conference where they say don't use fossil fuels. Again, a lot of irony in that. China and Russia are laughing all the way to the bank.
Yeah, oh, completely. They're really enjoying this. They got a lot of propaganda out of this for sure. Congressman Steve Scalise, as always, thank you, sir.